and welcome back to Drivers Talk. I'm Rick Titus. Of course, Spencer Crick over there on the board making me look taller than I am. Jay Dalton, well, is on the West Coast on a special assignment. We've got a special guest in, and one I'm very anxious to talk to because it deals with a topic that, frankly, we need to explore more and try to understand better. My goal in this conversation, George Elliott, is to really talk about what the customer needs to know. Because there's a lot of spoof products out there, a lot of snake oil out there, but I noticed this is the only product that Carroll Shelby would endorse, and as you were telling me earlier, and not take a penny to do it, and that's not Shelby-like. I loved them, but so it must have been awfully good. So, George, I really want to talk about what zMAX does, and of course, I want to know when you think the customer should start using it. I've got lots of questions. Main thing is, are you a happy zMAX guy?
I definitely am. I've been with the company 13 years, but I knew the product long before that, and it is the only product that I would work for and not feel, like I have a conscience.
Right.
So it does fall in the category of snake oil when you talk to the average consumer because it sits in the...
And that's the shame of it.
It is. It sits in the chemical aisle of an auto parts store.
Right.
And because of that, everybody says, well, that's snake oil. And probably when you go to a lot of these retailers and the counter people, if you ask them which one is better, they would probably point to the cheapest one.
Yeah.
And zMAX is not the cheapest one, but it has the best quality.
George, prior to doing this, when Ben Dawson said we're going to have you on the show, I went out in the shop, talked to our engine people, talked to the head of development here, and I said, what do you think of the product? And he goes, not one engine failure when we have zMAX in these cars. And I've tested with him. He tests hard.
And that's one of the reasons when Bruton Smith bought the company from Joe Linke, he bought it because he had a lot of auto dealerships, and he warrantied all his used cars, and
Whoa.
And so he didn't want really any warranty claims, and he didn't get any warranty claims because of the fact he required all used cars before they're sold to be treated with zMAX. And by that treatment, he cut down his warranties a lot.
And he's not a stupid man either.
No, he isn't.
He is not. Both very, very smart men. All right, I guess my first question is, I buy a brand new vehicle. How soon do you want me putting zMAX in it?
Right away.
No kidding.
Yes, because there's little high spots on the metal. The engine has high spots right after manufacturing, and those get hot when you first start running.
It'd be the first thing to get hot, yeah.
First thing to get hot. And when they get hot, then, crud will build up. Carbon starts building right away from the heat and, a little varnish here and there. And so you want to keep that from starting the buildup procedure. And by putting an average car 12 ounces in the crankcase and 12 ounces in the fuel, you kind of coat everything because that's what zMAX does. It uses the oil and the fuel as a carrier, and that's an important word.
It's a transportation medium.
It's a transportation medium. It doesn't modify the fuel, doesn't modify the oil, and that's another big important thing that a lot of people don't get. You don't want any additive, which by the true meaning, definition of additive, modifies whatever it's going into.
Fair point.
But it does not modify it. It just uses it as a carrier. It's a pure product. It's from a mineral-based product, and it's pure all the way to the last drop.
And it will go the distance of today's oil changes.
It's when we first started doing it, we used to say change it every 6,000 miles because that's what we found in testing. It weeps out of the metal. And when I say weeps out of the metal, that just really challenges the product again because one of our main mottos is it soaks into metal.
Right.
People say, well, how can it soak into metal?
Oh, trust me, that's on my list, George.
But all metal, when it gets hot, is porous. And that's another thing that's a little hard to believe is that you see this nice, shiny rod journal or crank, camshaft, whatever, and you say, nothing's going to soak into that. But when it's up to 190 degrees, there's pores are open in the metal. And the product, that's where absorbs, and it'll stay in there for about 6,000 miles, and then just weep out during the time that the car's sitting cold. So you don't, when you start the car up, you got some lubricity on the parts, and that makes it so, we like to say, puts the oil on roller skates, gets through the engine much quicker.
Good stuff. I'm going to back up. One of the things I want to validate that you said, I talked to a lot of powertrain engineers, and in particular with major engine companies or car companies, and they will all deny that their engines need breaking in. And I've found at 5,000 miles, that engine's personality is different than when you started.
It is.
Because you have smoothed things out. I never conceived the notion that I would put zMAX in day one. I somehow thought you were going to say to me, no, Rick, we'd like you to wait 10, 15,000 miles. Even true on diesels, do you think?
Oh, yes. Diesels really benefit well from zMAX, and you take some of these new trucks now where the oil path is different than a lot of automotive engines, and particularly like in the big Ford trucks and Dodge trucks, where oil goes through the injector system.
I was going to bring that up. Under huge pressure.
Under huge pressure, huge heat, and when you shut the engine off, you just shut off from hot to cold. That's it. And that creates varnish. And that varnish buildup can clog the injector to where you think that you got an injector that's just no good, and then you're going to take it in the dealer and be a $400 bill.
Oh, bucko.
Oh, you can, try $20 and put some zMAX into the oil system of the diesel engine and then let it flow through there and just clean off the varnish. Same thing for the turbocharger shaft. It goes through the high heat, shut it off quick, build up the varnish, slow down the turbocharger, you lose power.
Very interesting. Now I'm going to push just for a moment to the gas side.
Okay.
Because what is your expectation of your product doing? What are you trying to have your product do for that customer's benefit?
Well, the gas in all different parts of the country is different.
And that is so true.
And it also has a lot of moisture in it now with the ethanol. And the ethanol, if you have an older car that has steel fuel lines, there's a tendency for rust to build up. So you get a little coating of lubricity on the fuel lines, which will help prevent the rust. And on the newer cars, it just gets coating on everything, so injectors won't clog. And a lot of these eco engines are small turbos, and they coke up quite easy. And you want to prevent them from coking up and losing power.
So we're not looking necessarily in the short term for throttle response or more performance. Even the fuel additive is more of a protectant and a precautionary additive?
Yes. Again, it's not going to modify octane.
Mm-hmm.
It's not going to give you more power. Mm-hmm. And the only way it's going to give you more mileage is as it cleans up the engine, the total engine. Mm-hmm. And I'm talking about through the combustion chamber, Yep. Combustion chamber is where the power's made. So you got to keep that combustion chamber efficient at all times.
So it comes in highly atomized with the gasoline, then goes into a compression cycle, then the ignition cycle. How do spark plugs and how do valves feel about having zMAX in there? Is there any lubricating quality?
Yes. On the valve stems there is. Again,
I was wondering about the valve stems.
It's the varnish buildup on valve stems, which again is from heat and hot oil. So you get a lot of buildup on those parts. And on the actual valve seats, you can have just a little flake of carbon, which will hold the valve open a little bit.
Yeah, and now it's downhill fast.
That's right. Then you lose the compression and lose the power.
George, I don't know if you know this, but I know there's a movement out there against ethanol. I had the editor of Boating Magazine on because I was reading that magazine, and he was literally encouraging people to remove their fuel after every time they took their boat out. He didn't want the ethanol in the lines, in the carburetors. He wanted it out of there.
Well, it's moisture.
Yeah.
It's moisture, and so you don't want the lines to get clogged up. And I think it's quite frankly, I'm a pilot, and so having a full gas tank is the way to go. That prevents moisture. Now, ethanol, you can put, I always suggest that boat owners put zMAX in on the last run out on the lake before they put the boat away.
Okay.
And the same thing through the engine, and that way it keeps that lubricity that I was talking about there all over the engine, and less chance for things to get hard.
When we come back from break, George, I'm going to press you a little bit on zMAX, because I've taken a hard look, is the only product that says it will penetrate the pores of metal. I notice no one else has had the courage to make that statement. If anything, some are guilty of filling the pores of metal.
Yeah, true.
And I can tell, having done my homework, there's a big difference between penetrating and just filling the holes in. So I want to get into that a little bit. And then I'm curious who you see your buyer. Who is your key demographic? And I also want to get into the dangers of if you've got a vehicle with 100,000 miles on it, are there issues? Fuel injection versus carburation. So when we come back from break, George, I've got some questions I'd like to get into, because it's not fair to expect the auto parts kind of guy to know how to talk about this product.
That's right, Rick.
And there's so much mystery out there. AM/FM listeners, we're going to go to break right now. We'll be right back. Please rejoin us. And welcome back to Drivers Talk. Rick Titus and Spencer Crick. Jay Dalton out on special assignment. I think he's painting his house. That's how special it is. In any event, we've got George Elliott in from zMAX. Now, you've heard of zMAX, and you see the commercials. That's usually Carroll Shelby, though with his passing, they've not done that anymore. But zMAX was important to Shelby American. It was certainly important to Carroll.
It was.
And if Carroll trusted his engines and his cars, and I've talked to his people that maintain his vehicles, they all have zMAX in them. I never really thought through the notion of how challenging your job is of informing consumers how different your product really is. I can't imagine that challenge of communicating what you need people to know to trust you.
Well, that is hard. And even the government tried that once, and we were able to prove the value of zMAX, and we were able to keep all but one marketing claim in our claims. And it's something that was worth the test. They wouldn't take anybody's word for it. They wouldn't have taken Carroll's word for it. We had to do scientific proof, and we did a lot of testing. Bruton Smith, he really invested a lot of money to fight the FTC when we were being challenged, but we came out really well, and we were allowed to continue to do our advertising and promotion. It's different. The reason it gets challenged is the fact that it sits in a snake oil category.
Yeah. To me, that's the shame of it.
Yeah.
And though it would be great if every parts counter person knew more about the product, if there was a way for the customer to better understand it than even them, that would be fantastic, because then there'd be no competition. But in light of where you are placed on shelves, and in light of the fact that those cats have to sell a lot of things, from car waxes to air cleaners to key rings, to coolant, to anticipate that those guys are and ladies are going to know what you really need them to know. I want to get into that now, because the big difference is, and I know you're going to say, Rick, we were going to get there in a minute. We could talk about how it helps engine life, but to me, it's the protection side of the story on what we all know is the hardest part on an engine, and that's startup. And to me, based on what you've been telling me, George, that's the sense I get that zMAX really comes into its own.
That's right. When zMAX is installed in the engine, and it takes about, it goes into the oil and it circulates through the engine, through the oil system. And when it's going through the engine itself, it's soaking into the metal. Now, when I say soaking into the metal, what I mean by that...
Yeah, because that's a hard one to take in, George. I'm not going to fib to you.
It is. But the metal actually has pores. All metal has pores. And when it's hot, the pores are open. And when it's cold, the pores are closed. So as it weeps into the metal, and then the engine shut off, it's it goes in the cold cycle, and the product stays in there.
It stays put.
It stays put. And it will slowly weep out through the engine life.
I want to back you up on that, George, because that in and of itself is a big definer of the difference.
Right.
Because there's products out there, when you're growing up, you use them all. Yeah, they're there for a little bit. You shut that motor off, they drop out.
Right. And the thing is, when I say it soaks into the metal, it doesn't coat the metal, as some additives say.
A distinction worth making, you're right.
And by soaking in, it is tremendously different. I guess it's like if you put hand lotion on your hand and it makes it kind of moist and you don't scrub the skin off. It's kind of the same thing. The engine has a lubricating feature that keeps the metal moist, and therefore the oil can get through there quicker.
Wow.
And when the oil gets through there quicker, some engines take quite a while for the oil to circulate through the engine.
That's a scary thought, George, but okay.
And as it takes that time, the parts are dry. The metal would be dry. Mm-hmm. But with zMAX in there, it's got that lubricity. So the oil can get through the engine quicker, and it'll give it a better lubrication.
Well, first of all, on a personal note, if you're using a skin cream that actually strips the skin off, I really want you to look at other brands, George. Okay, just moving forward. What we're not talking about here is, we automatically think about the polished surface and the hardened surface of a crankshaft.
Right.
But the bearings are a fairly porous material, are they not?
And they're soft.
Very soft.
And the product soaks into that, but it's a little bit different. That gets the lubricity actually through the pores as it weeps out of the crank. It then goes to the bearings. That's the next place.
Yes.
So when it does that, the bearings are getting that pre-lubricity.
See, I love that part. And this is just as true for the top end and even the oil pump itself.
Right. Yeah.
That's all pressure friction.
Right.
That these things are under. So you're really protecting a lot of different moving parts inside the engine.
They say if it has a piston, you can use zMAX.
Oh, good point.
And we actually other things too, transmissions and rear end gears and transmissions. Harley Davidsons love it in their gearbox. It helps.
Well, let me back up. So if I go to, because I didn't do this, if I go to a shelf, am I going to see a special zMAX transmission lube?
We have a special transmission lube in the stores, and the only reason you couldn't use any of the other zMAX is because it's packaged for size. In other words, when you go into the auto parts store, you'll see 12-ounce bottles of engine and fuel, and that's the average serving, as we say.
Oh, I see.
For those parts.
Okay.
Same thing with transmission. It's just 6-ounce bottle. And that 6-ounce bottle is the average you'd put in the transmission.
So you're not overfilling.
You're not overfilling.
By volume.
Yeah.
I get it.
And now that you mention overfilling, some people call in, I'll ask our customer service people, well, do I have to not put the normal amount of oil in when I change the oil so I leave room for zMAX? No, you don't. It'll overfill the oil just a little bit, not much. You're talking 12 ounces, but as soon as you start running that,
I was going to say it's absorbed.
Yeah, it gets absorbed in the metal.
George, first of all, you did surprise me when you said you would love to see it go in on day one of buying a vehicle. Mm-hmm. Is there an age point where it's of little use to even attempt to use it? 300,000 miles, which is not an uncommon number anymore. 250. Can people still help themselves by using these products?
Generally speaking, yes.
Can they really?
If they put it in because at 250 or 300,000 miles, all of a sudden the car starts smoking or burning oil or something like that, it's something they can try and see if it solves the problem. It's not a repair product.
Okay.
So it'll...
What, it won't make more compression back for me?
Well, it will if it's carbon that's causing the problem.
If it's carbon, yep.
And then you'll be in good shape.
Who do you see... Because what occurs to me, having had airplanes and RVs and boats, it's not just the street car user, is it?
Oh, no. No, like I said, if it has a piston, you can put it in there, but it's used in aircraft under a different brand name, but it's the same family. And we've got guys with little RV airplanes that use it in those engines.
No kidding, those dudes?
Oh yeah, and motorcycles. Two-stroke or four-stroke, doesn't matter.
What occurs to me, well, I didn't think of that either, but what occurs to me, George, is you park an RV, you may not come back to it for a while.
Yeah, that's
You
true.
park a boat, you may not be back to it in a while. So the protection side of it really interests me because, again, you and I both know cold starts really hard on friction surfaces.
It is, and the product will stay moist on the metal. That's the main thing. So that gives it the early lubricity from cold starts. And if you're running an engine that's got some of this 020 oil or 530 or something like that.
When I got my Porsche Carrera and it said 020, I went, I'm sorry.
Yeah, it puckers you up, doesn't it?
No, that zero thing was not what I wanted to see.
No,
but it's true, you're right.
I don't like it either,
Yeah.
but that's why I always make sure. And I go to a dealership that doesn't sell zMAX, but he has to put it in when he changes the oil in my Lexus, and he understands why.
And so synthetic oils don't bother you?
Doesn't matter what kind of oil it is.
It does not.
No.
It will not dilute the quality or their efficiencies either.
And it does not replace oil. In other words, you don't.
Oh, because it is in fact going to go away.
Yes.
It's going to disappear into the surfaces.
Yeah. And oils nowadays, they blenders. I don't care if it's Shell, Pennzoil, or Quaker State. Doesn't matter. I mean, they blend some beautiful oils.
Yes.
And you don't want to screw them up with a product that will change the API rating.
Fair point.
That API rating is there for a reason. So you want to always protect the oil you have in it.
Let's go to a set and forget in the minute we got left in the set and forget mentality. I add it to my engine oil. I'm good till the next oil change?
Yes.
But when I add it to my gas tank, how often do I need to be adding it?
No more than 6,000 miles apart.
Okay, but it does not have to be every tank.
No, it does not.
Okay, you can still get benefit from that.
Right. I think if you're not once you've done the treatment, and if the car is accelerating off the signal or whatever without any stumbles or problems, you have nothing really probably plugged up.
Okay.
So,
Good to beat that activity, yeah.
Yeah, so you can get ahead of it.
Where can people go to learn more about zMAX?
zMAX.com.
Really that simple?
It's that simple, and there's a lot of technical stories in there. There's a lot of testimonials from people that got some really weird stories, and but they'll certainly tell you that it works.
Well, George, you've had the kind of career that would allowed you to go a lot of different places. You chose to go to zMAX.
Yeah.
I figured, given your background, there was a solid reason for that.
I believe in it.
Yep.
I trust it, and I know that if somebody comes up to me and says, I use your product, I know I'll feel good about it.
This is good. George Elliott, thank you for taking the time. We truly appreciate it. We're going to talk about zMAX down the road more. For our part here at Drivers Talk, we wish you open roads and safe motoring.
Thanks for watching Drivers Talk Radio. If you're watching this on YouTube, click that subscribe button and never miss a video. Or if you'd like to check out more, click on that video to the right. We'll see you on the next one.